Furiosa!
The darkest of angels.
I have a thing about feminine rage.
Hi, I'm LadyJenevia, and on my channel I like to talk about entertainment media. I remember back when Furiosa was being announced as a project, several years back, there was some ongoing discourse about the idea of a Fury Road prequel focusing on the character of Furiosa, but it wasn't going to include Charlize Theron, and it was sparking discussions of ageism, and I do want to acknowledge that that is an ongoing issue in the entertainment industry, but all things considered, I ended up really enjoying Furiosa. The way that it plays out doesn't really leave things open in such a way that would suggest a desire to push out more stories that star Anya Taylor-Joy. Apparently, George Miller has said in interviews over the years that there are other story ideas for sequels to Fury Road, so presuming that Furiosa performs well at the box office, hopefully that will leave things open to doing more stories in this world, directed by George Miller, because there is simply nothing else like these movies. There are other films that might try to do something similar, something involving big, loud action, something involving cars, something with a lot of stunts. But newsflash, none of those movies are as good as Fury Road and now Furiosa. If you force me to do a ranking right now, I would probably prefer Fury Road, but it doesn't really mean much when you consider that I would take Fury Road and Furiosa over the vast majority of major blockbusters corporate Hollywood has been churning out over the last decade or so. The only blockbusters that I would put above these two movies, James Cameron's Avatar films. And you know what both of those series have in common? Very old school directors with decades of experience making films. Hollywood has always had business people, producers, people who focus more on profits than the art itself. But there's simply no denying that things have escalated to an even more extreme point that now it's not even show business, but it's other industries like big tech and Wall Street that have gotten their filthy claws into the arts. Directors don't get to reach the levels of folks like George Miller, James Cameron, Ridley Scott if you don't grow and nurture their talent. Maybe you don't immediately sign a 9-figure budget, but you start with 7 and then low 8, mid 8, high 8, and well, you get the point. It really feels like a lot of the newer up-and-coming directors are just being chewed up and spat out because you can always hire someone newer for less money, or the second that someone doesn't turn you the most massive profit, you throw them into director's jail. How exactly are any directors supposed to reach these levels of becoming as iconic as people like George Miller if you constantly get in the way of their creative momentum? Now, before we get into more of the specifics of Furiosa, I want to remind everyone that, as always, there are donation links in the video description box for Palestine, animal shelters, eSIMs, feminine hygiene products. There are plenty of options to choose from. Now, normally I try to stay far away from giving much in the way of spoilers for an opening weekend review, but in the case of Furiosa, you already know a fair few things about the plot because of the fact that it's a prequel. You know where Furiosa is going to end up, you know the fate of her home, and even when you know all of those things, you simply cannot look away from the incredible spectacle that is this film. There's such phenomenal storytelling, there's dramatic stakes, you see these incredible larger-than-life action sequences, the likes of which feel like a lost art form nowadays, given how dedicated George Miller remains to doing so much of what you see on screen practically. But through it all, there's this emotional weight that gives the entire movie a level of gravitas that you wouldn't normally expect to see from a 21st century blockbuster. Now, I don't consider myself to be overly esoteric in my taste. I love a good rom-com. I've spent many months loudly advocating for the success of Anyone But You here on my channel. And I love James Cameron's Avatar films, which, given the record-setting box numbers, it wouldn't be surprising to hear people call those films populist in a very literal sense of that word. But even so, I've found myself increasingly put off by a lot of the major blockbusters that have been churned out over the last decade or so. Many of them are blatantly corporate products instead of anything I could consider to be even close to art. With the Avatar films, it's very clear that they're coming from James Cameron's lifelong dedication to environmentalism. With Anyone But You, it was very clear the film was made as a collaborative effort of people who love rom-coms, including the director, the main stars, and even some of the supporting actors. And funnily enough, one of those actors from Anyone But You, Charlie Fraser, is in Furiosa. She played Moggs in Anyone But You.
That was a fun summer.
Max! Captain says that we can steer the ship.
Oh, okay. Oh.
And in Furiosa, she plays Furiosa's mother. So Furiosa is split into 5 chapters, and that's a useful organizational tool, but I also think that given some of the more negative habits that have developed in certain movie watchers, it's probably going to be helpful to some of those people who are going to be late to discovering this film long after it's finished its theatrical run. The title cards are a good place to stop or pause if you don't have the patience to watch an excellent 2.5-hour film from start to finish. Now, I don't know if they have anything they would like to add back in, but if they wanted to do an extended version, I think the 5-chapter option lends itself really well to being converted into a 5-episode extended limited series. I don't know why some people are so weird about watching a film that runs above a 2-hour runtime when those same people have no problem binging a series that's going anywhere between 4 to 10 hours in one sitting. One of the things I was surprised by was the fact that the first 2 chapters don't even have Anya Taylor-Joy in them. I'd seen the younger actress, Alyla Browne, in the Furiosa trailer, but I guess I just assumed she was only going to be present for somewhere between, 10 to 20 minutes of the film. And instead, she's present as the main actress for almost half the film. I think it's over an hour of just her being this iconic character of Furiosa. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about other people playing Furiosa because Charlize Theron is so distinct and her physicality when she does action is so on another level and it's visceral, and I was skeptical about how other people would be able to live up to that standard. But the story was really well suited to have these other actresses play her because so much of what Furiosa has to do is not just action. She has to watch, observe, and learn what's going on in this horrible wasteland she finds herself in, the Citadel. She has to constantly be on high alert. She has to gather intel, form plans, develop skills, and ultimately survive in an extremely dangerous world, all while grappling with a giant mountain of emotional trauma. It's a much more complex story than the more simplistic narratives you might see in the lowest common denominator type of action films, regardless of whether those are also revenge stories. Both actresses excelled with the material they were given. Another person who ended up wowing me was Chris Hemsworth. This is one of my favorite performances I've ever seen him do. Now, to be fair, I have not seen everything in his filmography, but there are 1 or 2 things I've seen throughout his career that made me go, yeah, the industry's not using what this person has to offer as an actor. It always felt like he was being pushed towards jobs of mindless action. I think because he looks the way he does and because of his proclivity for fitness, he keeps being typecast, but I really enjoyed his work as Dementis. There were so many interesting choices he made. I don't want to belabor this talking point, but when I first saw the trailer, I of course noticed the prosthetic nose and went, right, okay, well, that's different. I don't recall seeing him wear a prosthetic nose for other roles, but now having seen the film, I really feel strongly that that was the right choice. If it wasn't a prosthetic nose, it was going to need to be something like a prosthetic forehead or some sort of facial scarring, just anything that was going to make him look significantly different. I think that Chris Hemsworth is too known and recognizable with his own face to a general, casual, movie-going audience that if they did not do something significant to transform his face, it might have impacted the audience's ability to believe and buy into his character work. Dementis was a really interesting villain, and he tends to shapeshift depending on the situation he's in. He'll play from different angles depending on what he wants and whom he's trying to get that from. So there's this element of manipulation, but he's also kind of brash and reckless. To be honest, I feel like the more that I think about the different things his character does, the more contradictions I find. And there's something really fascinating about that. And Chris has done so much work with changing his voice, developing a very particular physicality, and also having to play the character across so many decades of the story that he's very different depending on what part of the story you're at. This is all my speculation, of course, but I could very easily imagine another world where if Chris hadn't been physically transformed with the hair, the teeth, the costumes, and yes, the nose, that there would be some people who would dismiss the incredible amount of work that Chris did and simply go, well, why is Chris Hemsworth doing a funny voice? Chapter 3, I mean, I would be going back to the cinema for more rewatches even if the movie was just chapter 3. There's this long action sequence that wowed me every time I was watching it thinking, how much longer are they going to keep doing this? It just kept carrying on, and I was so in awe of the artistry, the attention to detail, the scale, the practical effects, and the design of everything, the stunts, the performers, every single detail was phenomenal. Now, don't get me wrong, there's really cool action to watch in the other chapters, but the one that happens in chapter 3, it just hit differently. If there was anything that I would nitpick, I think some of the ideology was a bit dodgy. It didn't feel quite as revolutionary as Fury Road, the way that they talked about larger conflicts throughout history. I don't know. I would have to watch it again to be sure, but it didn't quite hit the way that I wanted it to. I don't want to say too much about that because I want to do more rewatches before I fully form an opinion on what was said. It's something that is said during Act 5. And the part at the end where it seemed like we were going to get this big conflict between Dementis' followers and Immortan Joe's Citadel, I didn't really love that they kind of glossed over that. Now, I know that the main story is Furiosa and you want to see her confront Dementis, but the fact that they basically montaged it instead of doing another complete action sequence like the one we got in Chapter 3, it felt like a loss to not see those two sides fighting with each other. It felt like a missed opportunity. I would have been more than happy to get closer to a 3-hour runtime if it meant that that montage was extended into one giant fight between Team Dementis and Team Citadel. Avatar: The Way of Water was over 3 hours long, and I had zero issues with that runtime. James Cameron could have made that film even longer if he wanted to, and I would have still been there at the cinema to watch it and then rewatch it again and again. With films like that or Furiosa, you're being transported to this world that has such a distinct artistic vision from a seasoned professional with decades of experience. We're talking about ultimate masters of the craft. What George Miller does with action in this film, it's a level of artistry that most filmmakers can only dream of achieving. So overall, my general feedback is that if George Miller wants to keep making more Fury Road sequels, I will be there opening weekend every time. Sign me up, I'm ready to watch. And I also really loved how the end credits of Furiosa was basically a giant montage of Fury Road footage. It was like this big reminder to go watch that other film because you just went through 2.5 hours of quality cinema, so clearly you're going to want to stay in this world by watching the next sequential part of the story, which is Fury Road. Oh, and if anyone has made it this far in my video and hasn't seen Furiosa yet, I will tell you to keep an eye out for the cameo of Max. It's not Tom Hardy, but it is his stunt double from Fury Road, and that was a really fun Easter egg to see pop up. I could honestly go on and on about so many incredible things that I loved about Furiosa, but I will leave things there. Thank you for watching, thank you to my patrons, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.